Out of all the movies I have on my shelf, I think it's time to talk about this one in particular. The Cat in the Hat, starring the incomparable Mike Myers. You know him as Shrek mostly, but if you're into the real deep cut cinema, then you know him as the Cat in the Hat. This-
Okay, let's talk about this again. The Cat in the Hat, also known as Why Did They Even Make a Blu-ray of This?, is a 2003 film directed by Bo Welch, famed production designer behind films such as Beetlejuice and Men in Black. Interestingly, this is the only film he has directed, which is a lot like someone hitting a grand slam in their first ever at-bat and then never setting foot on a baseball field again. The film stars Mike Myers, who was known at the time for his roles on Saturday Night Live and as the ogre Shrek in the film whose name I cannot remember. The role was originally going to be played by Buzz Lightyear himself, Tim Allen, who wanted to give the cat a, quote, edge, because as a child he had been scared by the cat. Allen eventually dropped out to work on the Santa Claus 2, and the role went to Myers. I have never said this before, and will probably never say it again, but thank God for the Santa Claus 2. To put things mildly, this film did not get the best reception on release. It holds a whopping 9% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 3.9 on IMDb, and Dr. Seuss's widow was so appalled by the film that she forbade any live-action Seuss adaptations from then on, which canceled a sequel that had entered early development. Thanks a lot, Dr. Seuss's widow. But why do people hate this movie so much? And why do I love it so much? Well, let's dive in. The most common complaint about the film is its crude humor. Too much for a film aimed at children, many have argued. Well, I definitely agree with that to a point. I think the humor and writing is what gives this movie its unique charm. Every scene brings a new joke that just makes you think how, and who, and why. Most of this movie would not have been released as a kids movie today, and I'm honestly not entirely sure what was going on at Universal Studios back then for this to get released even in 2003. But I wouldn't have it any other way. Every joke in this movie just hits so perfectly. As someone who is a deep admirer of the Tim and Eric brand of absurdist comedy, this film feels like the perfect precursor to that. Most of this humor wouldn't fly in a normal movie, but this isn't the normal movie. For example, let's look at this joke from the climax of the film. For context, the goal of the scene is that the kids have to get to the cat's magical crate and relock it before its otherworldly chaos spreads out of control. The stakes are high, and the resolution of the conflict is relying on this scene. And, in the middle of it, we get this.
This is amazing! It's like a ride in an amusement park!
You mean like at Universal Studios? Cha-ching! Whoa!
There are two explanations for the existence of this scene. Explanation 1 is that the higher-ups at Universal made a demand that the film had to, in some way, promote the Universal Studios theme park. The writers and director couldn't find a way to do it subtly, so they chose to do it in the most abrupt and unsubtle way possible, to spite and poke fun at the demand's sheer existence. Explanation 2 is that there was no order from higher up, and the writers just decided to put this joke in there completely of their own accord. Both explanations are equally plausible, and neither of them detract from how absurd the joke is. And bear in mind, this film's target audience is ostensibly children, some of whom might not even get the joke. But it survived the writing, shooting, editing, post-production, and release process and never got cut. It endured, and it exists now to catch a viewer completely off guard, which is a core tenet of absurdist comedy. There are a lot of elements in this movie that don't quite make sense even in context. Like, the kid's mom is a real estate agent who works for a germaphobe boss in an office that is so green it would put a salad to shame. This boss has some impact on the story, being the force that pulls the mom away from the kids and thus allowing the plot to happen, as well as being a secondary source of overall jeopardy to the plot. But him being obsessed with green and cleanliness don't make any sense, and it's all played very over the top. In most movies, those aspects might have been cut or at least toned down. But this isn't most movies. This is The Cat in the Hat. This is a film that features Alec Baldwin delivering one of the best lines of all time with such conviction that you feel like you truly cannot believe that Nevins whizzed on his taco.
Oh! I can't believe you whizzed on my taco!
Actually, let's talk about Alec Baldwin for a second. As someone who has watched 30 Rock 5 times, I am quite the fan of Alec Baldwin, and in this movie, he seems to be the one having the most fun. Alec feels acutely aware of what kind of movie he's in and is completely running with it everywhere it goes, and it's so great. That seeming awareness adds so much to the film and to his character, turning what would be a stereotypical conniving villain role into more of a farcical take on that role. He is the underappreciated backbone of this film. The Cat in the Hat is a film that is built on non sequiturs, adult humor, overcommitted performances, and an air of self-awareness. It all adds up to something that is truly unlike anything else that has ever been released by a major studio. If you decide to watch this, and I sincerely hope you do, don't watch it as an adaptation of the book. Watch it as a bizarre take on the idea of the book, but filtered through many layers of irony and bad decisions. Comedically, I'd argue this film is ahead of its time. This came out in 2003. At that time, Adult Swim was still in its infancy and had not yet completely carved out its niche as a televised home for the stuff that was too absurd and too out there for normal television. YouTube hadn't even launched yet, meaning there was still no home for a wide variety of outlandish comedy sketches with the potential to go viral despite how unexplainable they are. There was no social media to propagate and spread memes and jokes that frequently trade in irony and outlandishness, thus giving them near instant exposure to millions of people all over the world. Today, The Cat in the Hat has what I might describe as a cult following. Scenes and quotes are spread around, pieces of it are reused and remixed to give it new life, and people seem to have gained an appreciation for this film, however ironic that appreciation may be. Now, we get it. But back then, the world hadn't quite been prepared for it in the way it is now. That, I think, is where the film's strange and misunderstood genius lies. It managed to capture a culture that didn't even exist yet.